Ready?
Hit it!
Hello everyone and welcome to Twice Nightly the podcast with Maria Lovelady
And Michael Alan-Bailey, a podcast that aims to bring everything variety out of the wings and into the limelight.
So what are we waiting for?
Let's raise the curtain
And start the show! Coming up on today's show, we talk to actor and director Guy Masterson.
We talk to Guy about his uncle, none other than Richard Burton, and how he inspired his latest project, Under Milkwood.
Underneath the Milkwood. And we find out loads about Guy's very colourful family tree, including Italian film stars, gangster employees, and even Hollywood limo drivers. Welcome back, everybody. It's nice to be with you again. Now, you thought that bringing Eugene Kelly's wife, that it couldn't get any more showbiz or more fabulous. Well, it does, because today we have had the absolute privilege of speaking to the brilliant Guy Masterson. Now, Guy Masterson is a performer, he's a writer, he's a director, he's a jack of all trades. He's a giant in the theatre. He's making waves in the West End. He's making waves on Broadway. He's currently performing in Wiltons Music Hall in his one-man show, Under Milkwood. And he also happens to be the nephew of the theatrical giant, Richard Burton.
Now, in this interview, you are going to hear everything. If you are a fan of Morecambe and Wise, there's something for you. If you're a big fan of Steven Spielberg, you're going to hear all about Jaws in this episode. If you're a fan of literature, you're going to hear all about Dylan Thomas. There is a variety of things for everybody in this episode. So keep listening, because I am certain that you will find something for you. But before we speak to Guy, we would just like to say thank you to everyone that's supported us so far coming to watch our show Twice Nightly, which is currently on tour. We've just finished our run, haven't we, Mike, at the Royal Court Theatre in Liverpool, and we are continuing on to the Shakespeare North, the Blackpool Grand, which gets a nice special mention in this interview.
It does.
And we are going to Bridge North Theatre on the Steps as well. So if you are in any of those places, make sure you buy a ticket and come and see us and come and say hi, because it would be absolutely great to see all of you in person at the show.
Don't forget the Gladstone. Did you say the Gladstone?
I didn't say the Gladstone. Don't forget the Gladstone.
That. My
Gladstone Theatre on the Wirral. We're going to be there as well. It will be a pleasure to see you there on the Wirral in that gorgeous theatre.
And we'd just like to take the opportunity to say thank you to everybody who did come and see us and support us at the Royal Court. We had the most amazing run there. The feedback was fantastic. The audiences were brilliant. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous venue. We just had the best time, didn't we?
We did, and I think as people who are creating, writing, performing, producing our own work, this interview today was exactly what we needed to hear in the middle of a tour. So if you are someone who is a performer or a creative in the theatre world, then this interview, keep listening, because Guy has got so much wisdom to share, and it really uplifted us today, didn't it, to listen to someone who has been in the field for such a long time and had so much to say.
So let's not waste any more time. Let's bring on our fabulous guest, Guy Masterson.
Let's start with Under Milkwood, which is happening next week from the 9th to the 13th of May at our beloved Wiltons Music Hall. Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about the show, how it came about, I think 30 years ago, and that you're still performing it now.
I know, it's incredible. Well, how it came about was that I was employed in the West End doing Cyrano de Bergerac with Robert Lindsay. There's the first ball drop.
Clang.
And, clang. And what a genius it was. He is to work with. Comedic genius. You know, we knew the jokes were coming, and yet every time he said them, we couldn't help cracking up. It was just his comic timing was razor sharp, and I learned a lot from being on stage with him for 9 months. That was incredible. And I had fired my agent, as a matter of fact, because she's probably the only agent in history that negotiated my deal downwards. And for the West End. And someone said, she did what? I said, yeah, she upped my deal to the point that it went over the threshold to go from 10% commission to 15%. So I did a calculation, and over the 9 months, I was earning £2,500 less than I would have done had I stuck £1 less than she got me. So I ended up parting company with her, but a magical thing happened on that. I learned that if you played an instrument on stage in the West End, you got musical wages. Everyone was sticking their hands up. Elijah Majinsky was saying, "Can anybody play the trumpet?" And 5 hands would go up. And I'm going, "Are you telling me there are 5 people in this cast who can play the trumpet?" A couple of days later, "Can anybody play the guitar?" 16 hands go up. And I'm going, "What?" And eventually I asked the question, why is everybody volunteering for this? And it says, because you get musical wages, which at that time was about, well, in fact, it was ended up being £400 a week more than my deal, which was, I think at the time it was £350 and a week for a West End show. I was going, what? This is crazy. Anyway, so eventually he calls it, "Can anybody play the drums?" And I stuck my hand up and looked around. I was the only one with my hand up. And I said, what? Someone said, "Idiot, that's not a musical instrument, that's percussion." I went, "Oh, well, you tell that to the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra."
Yeah.
So I got in touch with the musical union and I said, "Are the drums considered a musical instrument?" He said, "Well, you see, it depends if you're playing for music. Are you playing for music?" I said, "I could be." So I went to the musical director of the show and I said, "I'm having trouble with this beat. Can you write it down for me so I get it consistent?" And I had 3 moments in the show where I had to play a specific beat, and I did, which I could do, not a problem. And he wrote them all down for me. So there I had 3 pieces of music. And I went up to the company manager, who was famous because he had one blue eye and one brown eye. And he would look at you in such a way, he'd look at you and go, with his blue eye. And I said, "I've got music for my drum beat." And he says, "Oh, well done." And the following Friday, he came in with our paychecks, and he gave paychecks to the other 2 actors who were sharing my dressing room. And he proceeded to pull out this wad of notes, £20 notes, and he counted them out in front of us all, which was my back pay for 4 weeks of rehearsal and 2 weeks of performance.
Wow.
And I'm holding this money in my hand going, "Thank you so much." And of course, I didn't have to give my agent any of that because all the raise came up after I'd fired her. So, and it was nothing to do with her. I was doing that show and I'd find my agent. So I knew that the end of the run would come up and I would be out of work. So I decided to learn Under Milk Wood as a solo performance. I'd done a solo performance earlier and I fell in love with the genre. It was the first time that I had performed in front of an audience and felt anything different to what is this going to do for my career? You know, is this a good thing to do? And as I said, I fell in love with the genre, the direct communication with the audience, and I found that the work that I was doing was having a profound influence on the kids, and it was kind of like, oh, that's what this acting lark is about. So I wanted to do it again. And I chose Under Milk Wood, which I had been introduced to. Second big name drop coming up.
We're ready for it. We know this one's coming.
I'd been introduced to it by Richard Burton, who happened to be my great uncle. And in 1981, I'd driven him to Switzerland in a Mini Cooper S. I was 19. And I was studying biochemistry and chemistry at Cardiff University and completely lost. And I was in love with a girl. It was unreciprocated and terribly depressed. And I was thinking about dropping out and he persuaded me not to. But on this trip, when I was driving him, he just reminded me of the magic of poetry and literature. And he recited things from, Shakespeare. And he also did the opening monologue from Under Milk Wood. And I was, "Listen to this. To begin at the beginning." I went, "Oh, I've heard that." He goes, "Shh, listen." And I did. And I fell in love with the language. Anyway, that trip came to an end and I finished my degree and I went off to America to sort of find myself. I was only 21, still lost, and got involved in the restaurant business. And all the people who were I was in a management position, and all the people who were working with me seemed to be actors. And I used to go and see them perform because they were sort of my age and slightly older. So I would go and see them perform in their local showcases. And I then had a girlfriend who was an actress. And in 1984, during the Olympic Games, I received news that Uncle Richard had died of a cerebral hemorrhage. And it was a terrible shock. And my girlfriend, who was about the only person who I'd told about the relationship or about the trip, said, maybe it's time for you to have a go. So I went along to one of her acting classes. And I got there and the guy said, you can't just watch, you have to do something. So lucky I'd been warned about this by Marlene, and I had brushed up on To Be or Not to Be. Oh, no. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew by Hamlet. And I got up and I recited this thing. And at the end, they proceeded to criticize what I'd done. The whole class, offering tips and all that kind of thing. And at the end of the class, I was terrified. And the guy said, why don't you join the class? And, so I did. I soon found I was way out of my depth, knew nothing, of course. And I decided to enroll at UCLA School of Drama, and got into it. And then 2 semesters in, we all went off to audition for a musical. It was one of the things on the semester. You got to all go and get some experience auditioning. So we got the trade paper and there was something. So a bunch of us went off to audition for this musical. And again, another thing, I'd never sung out loud or in front of people before. And I did this a cappella thing by, I think it was a Noel Coward song. I don't know exactly how it started. Anyway, they gave me the lead
don't
role.
be quoting us extra fees for a musician there now with knowing you're singing.
I'll send you the bank details. Anyway, yeah, they gave me the lead role and they changed the name of the character to suit the fact that I was from Britain, and changed a few things in the play. And I was in it for 6 months, got an agent, and next thing you knew, going up for TV and commercials and stuff like that in Hollywood. And I left the restaurant business and took up carpentry to support my way, and just to sort of get some income. And one thing leads to another, and you keep going, and then eventually you suddenly find you're earning more as an actor than you are as a carpenter. And then Britain beckoned. I saw an audition in the same trade paper for Lambda. Said, if you want to, study at one of the great drama schools, apply here. So I called up, I got an audition, and they offered me a place. And I literally sold everything I had in America, gave up carpentry. I had a carpentry company by that point. And I gave it all up, came back here, went to Lambda, and was promptly out of work for the first time in my life. And there's a big difference between working in Hollywood as an actor and working in London. In Hollywood, you're expected to send your resume out and send your picture out once a month in those days, casting directors was a new thing. I mean, I think they started there was a handful of casting directors in the mid 80s. By the time I left in 1989, there were 800. So you're sending out 800 pictures a month with covering letters, and it used to take hours and hours and hours to do that. But if you didn't do that, the knowledge was, or the perceived wisdom was, that no one would know who you are. So that's what I expected to do. That was built into the bottom line of being an actor. Came to London. Of course, if you send your resume out more than once a year, you're blacklisted. No one wants to know. So there I was, 30 years old, never been out of work, but unable to change my world. I couldn't send my resume out, couldn't call, couldn't do anything. You had to leave that to an agent. And if your agent was 105 years old, as mine was, then nothing much was going to happen. And in fact, the job I got in the West End, I got for myself. So just had to have her negotiate it for me, which she proceeded to do downwards.
Did you find, Guy, during that time that you were auditioning and you were trying to build your career and you were trying to build a reputation, did you find that being Richard Burton's nephew was a help or a hindrance?
Well, I perceived it as a hindrance because that's why I didn't tell anybody, actually, because to me, I hadn't proved myself to be worthy of boasting about it. And if I was going to be Richard Burton, in those days, he'd only died a few years earlier anyway.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was a big thing to be nepotistic about that. And I didn't want, well, if you're Richard Burton's nephew, how come you're so crap? You know? So I chose not to tell anybody. And of course I was in a show, and suddenly someone had put the two together, and I changed my name from Mastroianni, which is my name, to Masterson. So there was that disconnect. So no one could make that link. So anyway, I kept it kind of quiet until I didn't have to. But when I was when I chose to do Under Milk Wood, exactly 30 years ago, crikey, this time 30 years ago, I was still doing coming to the end of Cyrano de Bergerac, and having started to learn the lines for Under Milk Wood, I had no idea what I was about to do, or how I was about to do it. It was a pure experiment in physical performance storytelling, because I'd seen Stephen Burkoff perform, and I thought, God, look what he can do with his whole body when all I'm doing is neck upwards, you know. And I now call it neck up acting, basically. The majority of what most actors do is neck up acting. They don't need the rest of their body, so they don't use it, you know. So I decided I wanted to use my whole body, because I have legs and my arms, and I like to use them. So that's what I chose to do with Under Milk Wood, and just explore physically this thing.
And
Which
just
I love.
to interrupt, sorry, did that come then from being 30 and being out of work and deciding to do your own thing and not sit around waiting for somebody else to give you the job?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
so it was a huge risk on your behalf then to do.
Well, actually, the greater risk was waiting for the phone to ring and nothing happening, and just becoming more and more depressed, and then going out and get a job which you then can't get out of. And you know, I was 30. I had been pretty self-actualizing in America, because that's the way they do things, you know. And I you know, when I became a carpenter, I decided I didn't want to be a $10 an hour carpenter. I wanted to be a $15 an hour assistant foreman. So I learned that. So I was earning, you know, a third again as much for my time as I would have been. And then I went up to foreman, because I thought, you know, you've got to have some gumption, you've got to do it. And if I'm going to give 8 hours of my day to a company, I want to earn the most I can in that 8 hours. I've always thought, figure out what the blockages are, and find out how you can break through those barriers. So when I was nearing the end of this contract in Cyrano de Bergerac, I thought, I don't want to be out of work. I've got to do something for myself. And so I learned Under Milk Wood purely as an experiment, and I got a couple of performances booked, and went out. I had no idea what to expect, the response. And as it turned out, the response was good. And I then suddenly got a call from the Travis Theatre in Edinburgh, which is, as we all know, the sort of National Theatre of Scotland, or it was anyway. And they called me and said, we hear you, I should do a Scottish accent, we hear you're doing a one-man Under Milk Wood. Would you like to come and do it in Edinburgh? And I said, yeah. And is it true you're related to Richard Burton? I said, as a matter of fact, it is. Well, that sounds great. Anyway, so they booked me, and they started the publicity with a link to Burton. And they said, well, I said, please handle it very delicately. It happened to be 1993, early 94, when I did the Travis, which was the year he died, which was the 10th anniversary. So there was all kind of things linked into that. And I had to handle it very carefully, and I had to make sure that I was doing something which was well received, so they couldn't say I was just trying to hang on the coattails of Richard Burton. And then I thought, well, actually, he was the one that introduced me to it in the first place. And I love it so much, and my love for it is honest. So why not say that he inspired me to do it? Why not sort of tie that in? And as I did, and it succeeded. Then it was invited back to the Edinburgh Fringe, and then with Edinburgh, anything can happen. And I was lucky and sold out the run, and then suddenly you're being invited to perform in different places in the world, and one thing leads to another.
And you've been doing this for 30 years and over 2,000 performances. How do you, as an actor, as a human, keep the passion going and keep it present? And your body must have changed a lot in that time. You just said it's very physical. How do you keep going?
Well, Under Milk Wood is a work of utter genius, first and foremost. And so it's very hard to get tired of the genius of Dylan Thomas. And I'm still finding new things in it as I perform it. And the way I perform it, which is complete freedom of physicalization and vocalization, I allow, it's almost like, and I don't want this to sound sort of up its own bottom, but I was such a cerebral actor before I took this on. Analyzing character and going deep into the motivation and all of that kind of thing. When I took Under Milk Wood on, I thought there are 69 characters. I can't go into that detail for all 69 characters. And so I'm gonna try to do this thing called empathetic acting, which is where I'm going to allow them to play me like an instrument. I'm going to try to just express my empathy for each one of these characters as they pop up. And lucky enough, I come from a very big Welsh family. Richard had 10 living brothers and sisters, but he was the 12th of 13 kids. So I've got all those uncles and aunts and all their children as reference points for my characters in Under Milk Wood. And I grew up in a Welsh enclave in North London, hence I don't have a complete and utter Welsh accent, but I have a Welsh lilt. Because Richard helped move the family, my mother down, and his other sister, Rhiannon, down to North London for their careers. So we grew up in North London. So I've got all this plethora of Welshness behind me to draw on. And so many of my characters are drawn from members of my family, which is extended family, which is a lot of fun. And so you asked what keeps me interested as a performer. Well, I'm playing a work of total genius, and it's an honor to do that. And because of the pleasure it gives, and the pleasure I have performing it, I've never got tired. There was one point when I think I performed it about 100 times in 1 year, and I thought maybe it's just need to back off a little. But no, I don't think I'll ever get tired of it.
So let's talk a little bit about Wiltons then, because we love Wiltons. It's such a fantastic venue. Why is it a special venue to you, Guy, and why was it important to put the show on there?
Well, a friend of mine, Frances Mayhew, was part of the original group that renovated it and got it up and going again. And she invited me down to see it when it was, uninhabitable. And she basically said, this is what's going to happen here. And we're going to do this. And if we get the grant, we're going to do this. And I thought, oh my God, this is absolutely, it's a beautiful place. And God, if they can get that, there's going to be magic in here. And then one thing led to another, and finally got up and running. And a couple of years ago, I think it was during that kind of break in COVID, I didn't put it on, Justin Butcher of Scaramouche Jones fame produced Scaramouche Jones there. I had directed the show. So suddenly I've got a show at Wiltons, and I just fell in love with the magic of it. It was so perfect for Scaramouche Jones. And I looked at it and said, oh my God, this would be perfect for the rawness of Under Milk Wood. And I should stress there's nothing on stage in my version. It's just me and a chair, or in Wilton's case, 2 chairs, because there's 2 levels of stage. And I can't be carrying a chair from upstairs and downstairs. Not that I'm doing it on a chair. Parts of it are on the chair. But and I thought, this needs nothing. It's got all the character in the walls and everything, and you're just in the presence of this incredible piece of literature, and which I'm attempting to channel. And I thought, it needs nothing. It's a perfect place. It has the right potential in order to you're not working at an automatic loss because there's not enough seats in the building. So yeah, a perfect place to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the first ever reading of Under Milk Wood.
If someone's listening and they don't know what to expect at all, what is your spiel for getting them to buy that ticket and come on down next week?
Well, firstly, apart from Dylan Thomas, is probably the greatest writer of the English language of the 20th century. I think he's now commonly recognized as right up there, if not at the pinnacle of creative writing of the 20th century. What to expect? It's a day in the life of a fictional Welsh fishing village, where the characters just come out and live their life, and you fall in love with them, you cry with them, you laugh with them. They're so ebullient and off the wall. And as a background to this, the idea came to Dylan Thomas because of James Joyce's Ulysses, which is a day in the life in Dublin, and he thought, what if I do a sort of a satirical Welsh version of Ulysses? And it started life as The Town Was Mad, and essentially because he looked around at his fellow townspeople, and they were all so weird and wonderful and had their little quirks, and everybody knew everything about everybody else. And so he started writing this play called The Town Was Mad, and the idea was that it was so mad that a civil servant had been sent up from London to declare the town mad. And the townspeople were so upset by this that they got their spokesman, Captain Cat, blind Captain Cat, to argue their case for them. And it was at a time when the world was going to war. So in their defense, they said, well, wait a second, what's going on outside of this town is far more crazy than we are. So fine, call us mad, wall us in, put sentries on the wall if you like, but leave us alone. And so it was from that idea, that absurd idea, that Under Milk Wood was born, and it grew life as a sort of an epic sequence of poems and short stories. A thing called Quite Early One Morning, and the BBC got hold of it. He did a lot of reading and writing for the BBC at the time. He had a wonderful sonorous voice, a bit like Alec Guinness, to begin at the beginning. And so he knew a lot of people in the BBC, and they finally commissioned him to get this finished, get this written. And I don't know how many advance checks he got from them, but he never finished it, just kept these checks rolling in. And
well done him, very clever.
Absolutely. And then of course he did the first reading on the 14th of May 1953 in New York at the YHA, the 92nd Street Y, and it caught the imagination. And then the BBC said, hurry up, we've got a broadcast date for this in January 1954. And so he was putting touches, and then of course he bloody went and died on us on November the 9th, day before Richard Burton's birthday. Richard Burton at the time was a star. He'd been nominated for, I think, 4 Oscars by that point. And so he'd been asked to play second voice. There were 2 narrators in Under Milk Wood, first voice and second voice. And Dylan Thomas was going to play first voice. They'd worked together at the BBC on a few projects, and they were both sort of the Welsh voices. And Richard was becoming, as I said, this huge star at the time. This was pre-Elizabeth. And he died the day before Richard's birthday. And so they promoted Richard to first voice for the broadcast on January 24th, 1954. And it was broadcast on the World Service, went out all over the world. And of course, it caused a sensation. And probably because Richard was so well known at the time, there was a big audience for it. And it changed Dylan's world. Before that, he struggled to earn a living, to pay for his family. He made more money on his tours in America than he ever made back in Britain, particularly working for the BBC, which notoriously paid very little. The income from Under Milk Wood and the notoriety and the fame grew after he was dead. Richard remained a huge supporter of him. And as Richard's fame grew, and particularly in 1963, when he met Elizabeth Taylor and then became a sort of a super megastar, he he kept pressing the powers that be in Britain to recognize the genius of Dylan Thomas, and he was part of the group that was instrumental in getting him a stone at Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey, and then of course he famously led the 1971 cast of The Film of Under Milk Wood by Andrew Sinclair, and he got his mate Peter O'Toole to be in it, and it's wonderful, Richard, wonderful.
As you do. I wish we had these all on speed dial.
And he got Elizabeth to do the part of Rosie Probert, which, you know, just gave that film a huge lift up. And even though it's a wild and wacky version of Under Milk Wood, looking at it now, I can see what Andrew Sinclair was trying to do without any special effects. Quite another work of retrospective genius, but at the time it wasn't particularly well received. But as I say,
how have you seen this change over the years? How you've seen it received? Because when you were just describing the plot just then, and this idea of a community just saying, "Look, leave us alone and don't judge us, and we'll be fine." Like, why are you so interested? You know, we've got all the things with the trans rights in America and the drag queens in America. You know, all these people. There's things happening still today where it's just saying, "Look, we're living our lives. Leave us alone and look at your own life before you judge us." How have you seen that response change over the years?
Well, interestingly, the thing that drew me to Under Milk Wood is the empathy, the incredible understanding of humanity that Dylan Thomas brings to his characters. Yes, there are some ridiculous, wonderfully humorous characters, but we're not laughing at them. We're sort of, it's this wonderful empathetic view of them. What someone would term the village bike, the girl that gives love to several of the villagers, is not a whore. She's just an earth mother, you know, and that's how Dylan, you fall in love with this character called Polygata. You just fall in. It's incredible that within 100 minutes you can fall in love with so many characters within that piece. You feel such empathy and humanity coursing out through those words, and that's what I celebrate. So, looking at how the world's changed, I think he, like many great surrealist artists, was able to put his finger on that pulse and put it into words, unlike anybody else. And I think that's his genius, and that's why he's now being recognized as the genius that he was on a global level. It's fascinating. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years, performed it all over the world, and it's always generated big audiences, wonderful audiences. And of course, the Welsh have come to love it. A lot of the conservative Welsh in the 50s hated it because they thought, you know, just going to get the English to laugh at us. And we're not interested in those peasants in those little villages. And in fact, the villages that he based the story on, which was Newquay and Larne, a lot of the villagers could see, they knew who he'd based these characters on, and they weren't happy with him. But they failed to see it beyond their own sort of resentment at the time. Now I think Larne and Newquay have embraced the whole thing. In fact, most Welsh villages, and particularly Swansea, from where Dylan came, have sort of embraced that genius and are recognizing that, you know, he wasn't just a local a genius, he was a global genius. Absolutely. And I think that's where we're at now with him.
There are so many productions, Guy, that you've been involved in that we could just talk to you for hours and hours and hours about. The one that I was keen to mention is The Shark is Broken, which is just, it's going to Broadway.
We're going to Broadway.
That is amazing.
Congratulations.
I mean, how did that project come about? And I mean, what was the hook, pardon the pun, to get you involved in that? You know, what was the thing? What was the bait that was dangled in front of you to get involved in a project like that?
Well, it wasn't really a bait at all. I didn't have to be baited. I knew Ian Shaw, Robert Shaw's son, for 25 years. And we had talked several times about what it's like being related to a superstar. And Robert was a great superstar. He was Oscar nominated. He was Tony nominated. He played in many. I don't think he was superstar in terms of his super fame, the way of Richard Burton, but he was certainly of that ilk. And of course, Quint became possibly his most notorious character in Jaws. And you could argue the central argument about the success of Jaws is that without Quint, Jaws would have just been a horror film. So Ian and I had talked about this, and the thing is with Ian, he looks like his dad. He's the only one of his 8 siblings, including him, that that looks like his father, and he's the only one who chose to be an actor. So whenever he walked into the audition room, very different from me, when he walked into an audition room, people expected Robert Shaw. When I walk in, they're not expecting Richard Burton. They might get it with the voice a little bit, but they don't get it by the way it looks. Well, that was a problem for Ian, because you know, he wanted to forge his own plow his own furrow, forge his own sword. I don't know what it is. So his reaction to it was to avoid it and to put it away, don't mention it. If it was brought up, he'd talk about it, but it wasn't his leading question, and he certainly didn't want to be accused of nepotism. So he avoided it. And also his father had issues. His father had, I think, 4 marriages, maybe 5, and he was an alcoholic, much like Uncle Richard was. And so we had a lot to talk about, but his problems were bigger than mine on that front. I dealt with it in a way because of this trip that I took with Richard, and we became very, very close over that period of time, and he became this huge inspiration and this sort of behind my head when I was performing. And I did have issues that I had to deal with, and I kind of put them to bed when I directed a play about Richard, because I was able to, in that play, explore those qualities that the public didn't know, that I had witnessed, that the public didn't know, and put them on the stage. But Ian didn't have that public thing to deal with. Anyway, Ian called me at Christmas of 2017 and said, I think this is a funny anecdote, but it's probably not exactly how it was done. He said, "I'm tired of being poor. I have an idea. What do you think of this?" And he told me his idea: 3 men in a boat. And again, the embellished version of this was, I said to him, "Would that boat be the Orca, perhaps?" Anyway, he said 3 men in the boat. And based on the making of Jaws, he got his father's diaries, and there were entries about the filming of it, and they were funny and they were dark and all that kind of thing. And so he had this idea about writing the backstage story of the making of Jaws, on the premise that the Orca was the green room, used as the green room for the 3 main actors when they were doing the filming on the sea. Second thing was, Steven Spielberg wanted to film on the ocean instead of in a water tank, where you can control the elements. On the sea, you can't control anything, and you're at the mercy of the sun and the wind and the storms, and you're at the mercy of tourists in their sloops trying to get into shot and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, you're at the mercy of a great mechanical shark that they didn't realize when they made it, that the salt water would get into the workings and it would all fall apart. So what was supposed to be an 8-week shoot turned into a 16-week shoot, and they were cooped up for long hours at a time on this boat. So right there is the making of a really funny situation, especially when you've got a feisty English actor who also likes his alcohol, trying to keep himself dry and sober. But the elements and everything getting in the way of that. You've got Scheider, who's probably the most serene and organized of the 3 actors, and you've got this 24-year-old Richard Dreyfuss, desperate to make his mark, and like a little puppy biting at the old Grizzly Shaw's ankles, going, "What about me? What about me? What about me?" And so it just made, the moment he expressed this to me, I thought, oh my God, this has the makings of great comedy. Then if you play into that, Ian Shaw playing his dad, looking like his dad, playing his dad, you've got this incredible meta thing going on as well, especially when Ian was trying to come to terms with his father's alcoholism, and and how that played into the filming of Quint, and all of that. And then the central point is, without the Indianapolis speech in Jaws, would Jaws have been as great as it was? I mean, you could say without Quint, would it have been great? Without the Indianapolis
that speech. I was going to actually ask, does Ian try and recreate that speech?
Yes, he does, and he does it so incredibly brilliantly that you couldn't see the joint. You believe it's his father doing it. Well, the whole premise of the piece is getting the 3 stars to the end of the shoot, and as the shoot extends, and the local public in Martha's Vineyard, just getting in the way of the shooting, sending sloops out, and it takes 2 hours to cross the horizon. So anytime a sloop would come into shot, they wouldn't be able to film for 2 hours. So the locals would arrange it so that there'd be a sloop, and then another sloop, and then another sloop, and a whole day of filming would go down. And it was a complete and utter nightmare. Little did they know, of course, now Martha's Vineyard is so proud of this bloody film. They've got a whole industry about it, but at the time they weren't happy. So all this feeds into the stress of the scenes, and how those 3 actors pass the time, and the energy, how that changes throughout the whole thing. But the secondary story is of the progression of the Indianapolis speech, which at the start of the play was about 12 pages long. And way overwritten, famously overwritten. And Robert Shaw was a Tony Award winning playwright who had the responsibility of playing this. And he's reading through this. He goes, "We're not doing bloody Shakespeare." And then another famous moment in the filming was that when they did come to film it, he got up to do it and said, "This is ridiculous. You've got to let me rewrite this." And Stephen says, "Okay, you have a crack at it, Robert." And so then you see him rewriting the speech, and then and then when he gets up to film it, he had a conversation with Stephen where he said, I think he should have a few drinks in him when he does this, and Stephen agreed to it, and of course he had more than 1 or 2 drinks, and of course he couldn't get through it, and he passed out, and then called Stephen in the middle of the night saying, "What did I say? What did I do?" And Stephen agreed that he would bury the footage, and that he was thinking of cutting the scene entirely. And Robert said, no, you can't cut it. You can't cut it. It's essential, blah, 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 blah. I will get this right. I promise. Give me another shot. And so they did. And what you see is what you got. And of course, it is the moment. It's very rare, firstly, that you get a 5-minute speech in the middle of a film where the camera only deviates from the character once back, and it goes to Dreyfus and Scheider for a cutaway and then comes back. But 5 minutes of a monologue, but it's so incredibly delivered that the camera closes in on those eyes and that quizzical face that he has, and you just see the whole picture of horror before you, and why he's so anti the shark, and it's the crowning glory of the movie.
I don't think anyone could tell you how long that speech is, because you get so drawn into it. Like you say, even, with the camera going in for the close up in the zoom, and just his delivery, like you're with him, you totally believe everything that he's saying. And the entire character makes sense in this one speech. Everything that we've seen that he's been this outrageous character that people feel uncomfortable to be around. And, you're never quite sure whether he's going to, kiss you or punch you. And it all makes sense with this speech.
Absolutely. It all comes together. And I will never wear a life jacket again. And anyway, so there's the core of there's the arc of the play. Will they get to that speech? Will they? It's set up at the beginning how awful, it's badly written it is, and then it's set up with that he's going to have a go at writing it. Then he fails filming it, and then finally he delivers it. And it is a moment literally where the audience just stands and cheers. Because I have to say, the play is beautifully written, beautifully modulated, and Ian has gone through the ringer playing his dad, and especially how honest he is. it brings tears to my eyes, actually, to think how honest he is about his father's problems.
Has Steven Spielberg ever expressed any interest in the show?
Yes, he has.
Wow.
I don't know how full an interest, but he's a friend of our producer, Sonia Friedman. And so Sonia has effectively cleared it with him. He's read it, has approved it, and loves what it's saying and doing. So yes, no problem at all. Same thing with Richard Dreyfuss. I should add that there are no holds barred in the playing of these characters. So the tension as it grows through the play, I mean, it's comedic, but it's also incredibly poignant. And it's all based on truth. Yeah, there are some dramatized moments which we know to have happened because of the Jaws log and various accounts of what happened. But for Ian and Joseph Nixon, his co-writer, to pull all this together in a 90-minute play, and testament to it was that it was nominated for Best New Comedy last year. But we took it to Toronto, and I think when you're Olivier-nominated for Best New Comedy, people are expecting a laugh every line. Noises off or something like that. This is not that. This is a very cerebral, British, sardonic comedy where when the laughs come, they're big and powerful, and then the tears come. There are tears in this thing, or where people are laughing and suddenly they're going, "Oh, shouldn't have laughed at that," So it's fascinating, and to being able to direct that was a privilege, and also to work with a West End budget, which is such a relief. It's a privilege, I tell you that.
That was going to be my next question, because we were talking earlier in the interview about how you were an actor and then you did your own project to get yourself work. How, because you've directed so many productions and you're really successful as a director. How did you make that jump into being on the other side of the team?
Well, the first one was the Burton play, which I directed. And I got involved because I didn't want a bullshit play about my uncle to be out there. So I got involved with that, and just to make sure that the story that was being told was a more true one. And it wasn't just, lacking, on his drunkenness and his wasted talent and the relationship with Elizabeth Taylor. You can easily exploit those stories. Of course you can. So I got involved for that. And then people would come to me with their projects, and I would say, have you got a director on board? And I said, because I like this, I'd love to perhaps direct it. And and then I found that I direct as I receive it. I very rarely go into a project having a vision. There's the people talk about director's vision. I don't have a vision. My vision is what the writer and the actors are bringing to me as a director, and it molds itself from there. Sometimes I can contextualize it in my head, saying, yeah, this seems like it needs to be set in a sort of Victorian Whitechapel existence, and I'll talk that through with the writer, and they go, yeah, that's good, and we can mold it that way. But I don't ever have a vision of what I'm expecting the actors to bring. I don't look at it in a filmic. I look at theatre as an evolving art form, not a filmic art form where literally every single shot is planned. And I think that is where I thrive in thinking of it as a progressive moment to moment thing, which is where I think art can happen. Firstly, I should add, and this same will be contentious, and you'll probably get actors writing in going, I don't believe acting is an art form in itself. I believe acting is an interpretive form, but that relies on the empathy of the actor to bring out whatever is in there, and therefore it's an interpretation of what the author has written, and it comes out through the actors, through the actor's spirit. That to me is not an art form in itself, but what is given, what is recorded, what the audience receive can feel like art, particularly in the overall picture. I don't like to call myself an artist as a performer or a director. As a writer, I would say I have more rights to call it an art form because it's coming from somewhere deep within me, and it's an original thing, and it's not interpreted, it's just flowing out. So that to me is a more true, it may be a semantic differential here, but to me that's what art in our business is. That doesn't mean to say that actors can't achieve art. Means it just avoids the ego getting involved, saying, I've created that, therefore it needs to be in there, regardless of whether you think it's justified or not. And if the director and the actor have an issue with a moment, it's generally about ownership. And it's generally about the actor considering what they've done as an artistic impulse, and therefore it has every right to be in there. But the director has to say, that's not fitting the story. And I recognize it's a great moment, but it doesn't fit the overall story. So I need it modulated or changed or redirected. And it's a very tricky area. So I, for one, trying to deal with my own ego as a creator or as an interpreter, is to get the ego out of it and say, if it's not working, let's ditch it and try something different. And working with comedians, and I've done a lot of work with comedians, I think that's their core principle. You know, I have a great joke in my head. I'm going to try it on this audience. If it works, we'll tweak it and make it even better. If it doesn't work, we'll tweak it. And if it doesn't work, it's gone. Let's move on. I'm not married to making that joke work. You know what I'm saying? So I learned that from working with comedians. I directed a whole bunch of comedians in a play called 12 Angry Men, which is one of the great, perfect plays.
Yeah.
And firstly, it's like herding cats trying to do it. Right? You know, they come in, they don't know the protocols of a proper theatrical rehearsal schedule, and they're going off to do gigs, so they have to leave at 4 o'clock to get up to wherever to do a gig. And, you know.
And 12 Angry Men is not a comedy.
No, it's not.
So
Absolutely
that must have been a big challenge.
Although I can tell you that Bill Bailey brought out the most incredible laugh in the play. And that's an aside, but so you do have these tension relieving laughs. When the littlest actor in the room, it was Ian Coppinger, went up to Bill Bailey, who's, you know, it's the hottest day of the year, and he's in this 3-piece suit, and everyone's doing sweat acting, hot day acting. And Ian Coppinger, who's about 4'10" or whatever, goes up to Bill Bailey and looks at him and goes, "Pardon me, don't you sweat?" And Bill looked at him and went, No, I don't. And walked away. And it was like, I've never considered this question before. And it was just a brilliant moment, only deliverable by Bill Bailey, when he brought the entire house down. And it was beautiful because it happened at a moment when we absolutely needed stress to be relieved. So when Bill couldn't do the Australian tour of this thing, I took over the role rather than having to recast and re-rehearse, because I knew getting 11 comedians into the room again after my previous experience was virtually impossible. So we had about 3 days to get this rehearsed in. I knew the lines anyway, and I could fit into Bill's suit with a little bit of dieting. So I went on in Australia, and every time in the rehearsals, Dave Johns, who famously now does I, Daniel Blake and Fisherman's Friends and all of that, who had the smallest role in the play, every time I walked past him, he'd go, "You're shit. You're not as good as Bill. You're not as good as Bill," as I'm walking past him. So anyway, my first performance in front of a full audience was 1,200 people at the Madge Theatre in Perth, Australia. And I walked down to do this moment, and Ian Coppinger came up and said, "Pardon me, don't you sweat?" And I did it exactly as Bill did it. Exactly. I just copied every single nuance. No, I don't. And I walked away. The whole audience just went, and I turned around with my hand hidden, and I gave them the finger.
Well, we can't let you go before talking about Morecambe, because obviously you directed that. It was a wonderful success for you, and being a variety theatre podcast, we can't let you go without telling us some anecdotes about that show, what it meant to you.
Oh, well, it meant a huge amount to me, because Bob, the actor in Morecambe, and I had been friends since we did a play together in 1997. And Bob used to wear these little round glasses. And it just reminded me so much of Eric as a young man. And so every time I did that, Bob would go, "Oh, Okay, sunshine. And I said, we are going to do a one-man play about Eric Morecambe in 10 years' time. When you've grown up, when you've grown into it, you can do Eric. And anyway, time came and passed. Bob and I were very, very close. And eventually, it was 12 years in, and our careers had gone into all kinds of different places. He'd gone on to become one of the voices on Teletubbies. I think it was Teletubbies. No, the other one.
It's the Tweenies, I
The
think.
Tweenies.
Yeah, and I think he was both characters of both the male Tweenies, which when I discovered that, I was like, my childhood was ruined, actually, that I didn't, that it was so fake.
Very disturbing, very disturbing. And he was always good at voices, and that was the thing which we built the show around, how good Bob was at impersonation characters, and he was a great singer and everything, all the things that Eric was, and we got this great writer on, Tim Whitnell, to write the piece. I was going to write it, but I just couldn't. It wasn't something with I couldn't do justice. And Tim Whitnell came on. He'd won a BAFTA for the thing he did about famous British radio comedian, and he was close friends with Bob, and we all just made this wonderful thing, and it just evolved into this huge glorified one-man show. Now I've worked on many solo shows, but when you're working with a character such as Eric, and you know that it's the 50th anniversary of his death, and you know that you've got to get this right, and you can't use any of his original material because it's all copyright, so it had to be original material in the style of Eric Morecambe, and we're trying to tell his life story in a way that, and we didn't have an Ernie Wise, and so the idea of the glove puppet repeated itself, Ernie Wise as a ventriloquist doll, which is
you need to stop giving Mike ideas, because he's just going to replace me with a glove puppet one of these days.
But so it was just one of those things that evolved. And again, I come back to the idea that nothing was planned. All I knew was that this had to be pitched as a bigger show, and so we raised the money to do it. Again, I booked a tour on the back of the idea, based on a 10-minute segment that we rehearsed, sent it out to all these theaters to say, if you like this, do you want to book the show sight unseen? And because I'd been touring for God knows how long, and I booked a 20-stop tour on the back of that, the income from that guaranteed the loans, blah, 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 and we were able to present it at the level it needed to be presented. And then, of course, it hit in Edinburgh, and then the West End producers came flocking, and then negotiations were done, and we did it in the West End, and then we had a #1 tour lined up for it, and it just took off. And for me it was a wonderful evolution of a great idea which happened completely innocently on the stage in another show 13 years earlier, and I love that when that kind of thing happens. And I would say for my three biggest successes, 12 Angry Men, Morecambe, and Shark, all three of them have come purely from that innocent moment in a bar or something where someone goes, wouldn't it be great if? And I'm the sort of person that goes, not only would it be great if, I'm going to do what I can to make it happen. And maybe that's a throwback from the self-actualization thing from working in Hollywood. And but I think it gnaws at me when there's a good idea and it can't be made. And I try not to let barriers such as where are we going to get the money from to get in the way. And if you can't raise money, then you're going to do it anyway. And Undermilk Wood was an example of that. I didn't have any money at the time. And I just said, well, I'm not going to have any props, and I'm not going to have any set, and I'll just do Undermilk Wood as pure as it can be. And that thing's grossed, well, let's not even go into money, but it's
done well.
It's done well. And as I said, it's opened doors. So if I had a message for any aspiring performer out there, is don't take no for an answer, but be polite about it. If you've got a good idea, don't let anybody talk you out of that good idea. Find other people. If it's a good idea, you will infect them with your enthusiasm. And soon enough, you'll find a quorum of people that help you make it work. That's all that a producer does, really.
Guy, we would never bore you with the details, but we can't tell you how much we needed to hear that today.
Well, you know,
That's
it's
fantastic advice.
it is. I mean, all of us performers, you know, the reality is it's very, very hard to find your way through that melee of fellow performers who they're not in competition with you. They just are doing what they do, and there are finite numbers of jobs for a very large number of people. And all I can say is that the thing which makes you individual as a performer is your spirit. And you cannot allow your spirit to be defeated or closed down because of the world that you're working in. You've got to find ways of shining out anyway, despite all of that. And if you keep just doing your best work and keep working with people in an honest, good way, no one treading on anybody's feet, you will get to where you want to go. I promise you. I mean, obviously talent plays a big part, and you've got to be honest about your talent. You really have to be honest. You've got to look at yourself and go, do I have what it takes? And if you don't have what it takes to be a performer, which may be your dream, you know, just be realistic about it. And just, you want to remain in the business, step aside, do something else. See if you've got a talent for writing, see if you've got a talent for directing. It may not be on stage. And that opens up another question. You know, why do performers want to be performers? Let it not be, please let it not be trying to fill in a hole in your upbringing or a perceived hole that you find this is the only way you can get attention.
Yeah.
That's going to be a very difficult journey for you. You'll take rejection very badly. You know, you won't listen to the right people because your overall arching need is to be on the stage regardless of anything else. We've got to look at what we do as a profession, and we need to be as professional as we can about it. And that's a lot of that is about looking at yourself and say, do I have what it takes to go the distance? What do I need to learn? You know,
Could I ask, so for you, when you are in a lot of these productions involved as a creative, but then also on the business side of things, how do you handle that? Because a lot of the time they're filled by two very different people, but that's all you.
Good question. It's a very, very good question, because very often people new to the game are doing it because they've got to get this thing out of them, this creative thing, which they think is going to be a work of genius. And of course, if you disavow them of that in any shape or form, rather than going, oh, really, you think it needs that much improvement? They might go, oh, well, if you don't like it, I'll take it somewhere else. I'm going, no, listen to what I'm saying. There are ways of making this better. But mine is only one opinion. Take it to some other people. Here are some other people to talk to. You know, because ego often gets in the way of great work. And how many great works are there that have been shelved, that have been lost because there's intransigence somewhere in the creative process? And my whole thing is, listen, someone else's opinion might be the thing that unpicks this lock, and you've just got to be open to it. I might sound like a very strident sort of guy, and I'm very strong in my opinions, and I guess I am, but only when I think if there's something that's getting in the way of this project, we need to get to the bottom of it. And it's very rarely that that an ego over here has prevented me from getting there, because I'll do whatever I have to do to get them to see what's necessary. And if they don't, then I'll just say, okay, well, I'm not the right guy for you, you know. But very often, you know, we do come to those conclusions as we mature. And you know, crikey, it was about 10 years ago when I was 50 odd, that I was considering a change of career, and I realized I can't not do what I do. And that's a terrifying thing, because if things aren't working and you can't do anything else apart from stack shelves at Tesco, and you're too old to get into a new career, and you've got a family to feed and a mortgage to pay, that is a terrifying place to be. So once I realized there is no out here, I have to continue doing what I'm doing, and I've got to do what I do as best I can. That necessity is what drives you to do the right thing. You can't afford to be ego-driven at all, I think. And
well, thank God you didn't quit, because it led you to Broadway.
Broadway. My
So
father
which theatre is the show going to, Guy?
The Golden Theatre. This is my father.
Oh.
I'm going to bring this guy in. This is my papa.
Oh,
Oh.
wow. So they were looking at a photo for all you visual your audio listeners.
My father was Mastroianni, Carlo Mastroianni, and his story.
That's a great name.
Carlo Liebknecht Mastroianni.
That's fantastic.
Extraordinary story. I'm going to bore you with this, but he was in his mother's belly when they came across from Napoli through Ellis Island into New York in 1921. And he was born in Brooklyn a few weeks later. And they had nothing apart from, a couple of suitcases and a mandolin. And nobody in the family knows where the mandolin came from. It just was an heirloom. It got passed down and they had it and they brought it in. Anyway, my grandfather was a stonemason, and a good one. And he soon set up a business doing memorials in Brooklyn. And this was at a time when the mafia was really sort of setting. There were mafia families all over Brooklyn and New York and New Jersey and the Bronx and all of that kind of stuff. And anyway, so he did a lot of memorials for the mafia family, and I'm sure that at the time the business was booming.
There's a play in that, isn't there?
There is. Anyway, so all the four brothers, three brothers, and one. No, there were four brothers. That's right. They were all being groomed to be in the family business, and my father included. But my father, the oldest, picked up the mandolin at a very young age and started to pluck tunes. And someone along the line said, "Someone's got to put a violin in that kid's hands." And so they did, and he demonstrated talent. And whilst he still learned the stonemason business, he was finally offered a place at Juilliard.
Wow.
And yeah, and of course, no one had money in the family to send it to Juilliard. So the apocryphal story is that a deal was done with the local mafia family, the Tassi family, minor. And let's just say
throw that out there.
They weren't the Corleones. They might have worked for the Corleones. We don't. Anyway, so he went, but the deal was done that he would marry the oldest daughter, who was beautiful but slightly larger than the two younger daughters, who were desperate to get married to their boyfriends. But until she got married, they couldn't get married. So a deal was done. My father married this woman and this lady, and he went to Juilliard, and they had four kids very quickly. She was about 7 years older than him, and I
don't think this was going to be the story when you
he went to Juilliard and emerged and came out and went straight into the New York Philharmonic. And that's where he stayed for 10 years under Bernstein and all of that in Carnegie Hall. Now, the story goes on, but I'm not going to go there. Because him meeting my mother's, well, maybe I should tell you very, very quickly.
Yeah, quickly.
He walked out
we
on
need
the
to know
family.
now.
He walked out on the family when my older brother was 8 or 9 years old, and my older brother said that he was getting into some bad stuff in Brooklyn at the time, and and Dad walked out on the family and gave him a shoebox saying, "Use this, you'll never be poor," and Dad disappeared. He said, "I can't tell you where I'm going, but I've got to go." Apparently, a deal. He was being pressured to get out of music. He wasn't earning enough money for the family, and he couldn't turn his back. So he decided to go. And now I don't know how much truth is in that. That might be the distilled version. Makes for a great story. Anyway, he turned up in Chicago a couple of years later. He changed his name to Carl Masters, and then ended up in Hollywood. And this is where the story gets interesting, because Uncle Richard was in Hollywood filming. My mother was touring in a musical called Choo Chin Chow on Ice, which I don't think will ever get done again, and another one called South Pacific. And she finished the tour in British Columbia, and then came down on the whatever it was train, probably the Choo choo train, and came down and ended up in Hollywood. And Richard got her a job on a movie as a continuity girl on a film called I Want to Live. And Walter Wanger was the producer of that. He had his own studios, and he ended up producing Cleopatra and various things. Anyway, so she worked as a continuity girl on that and was taking Richard's limo in on a daily basis to the studio. And the driver of that limo was my father's brother, who had gone out to Hollywood to join him. And he talked like this, Uncle Rebello. He wanted to be in the movies, but he took a job driving for the Teamsters Union. And one of his jobs was driving Richard Burton. And so he drove Richard Burton, and he would say to my mother, you got to meet my brother. You'd love him. He'd love you. And that's what they did. They met, they fell in love. They got married in Las Vegas 3.5 months later, on the same day that his decree nisi came through from New York.
Wow.
And he sold everything he had in New York, came back to Britain. And here I am as testament to that little relationship. But Richard was doing a film with Marcello Mastroianni a couple of years later and said, you know, my sister's married to a Mastroianni. And Marcello goes, oh, let us go and find out. And so he does this research. Turns out that Marcello's great-grandfather was my father's great-grandfather.
No.
Yeah, unbelievable. So the families had split. So
You know,
Marcello,
before when you said your real name was Mastroianni, I was going to say, oh, like you should have capitalized on the, you know, Marcello. And there's a genuine connection.
there's a genuine connection. I think that it's been distilled down a bit, but yes, my
Oh
father's
my
great-grandfather.
God.
So I think it's
That's
second
amazing.
time.
Look, I've got to just show you then quickly, Guy. Just look what I've got on my wall. Hang on a minute.
You've got a picture of Frida Kahlo, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and Marcello Mastroianni.
This is it.
Oh, La Dolce Vita. Oh, isn't it gorgeous?
Marcello Mastroianni is one of my favorites.
There's a likeness.
Absolute favorites. I'm a huge Fellini fan.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Take your glasses off. You look like Marcello.
Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
What's
There it is.
the most unbelievable thing about this whole story is that Richard Burton isn't your most interesting relative after all of these diversions into your past. Richard Burton's a bit like, well, you know, we've covered that. I want to know about this limo driver.
Oh, my Uncle Rebello. Oh, look, I've just found this. That's the family. They were at a Chinese restaurant.
Did you know Elizabeth well?
I didn't know her well. I knew her all my life. And then Uncle Richard died. When Uncle Richard died, I would go up to the house to see my cousin Maria. In fact, I think I've got a picture of Maria just here, actually. There we are. There's Maria Burton.
Oh.
That's their adopted daughter. That's at Elizabeth's house in Bel Air. And I went up to see her. And of course, Elizabeth walked in, and I hadn't seen her for there's me posing with Elizabeth's Oscar with my sister.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh my
pretending
God.
I'd just been awarded the Oscar when I started acting. So I went up to the house in Bel Air. There's a lovely picture of Uncle Richard umpiring a game of tennis.
These are amazing photos.
He used to score with cigarette butts.
Yeah.
Advantage, Guy. 40, whatever it was, and the wind would blow. He says, revision, 50 in all. Let me see. I've got a nice one of Elizabeth actually in here, I think. Oh, it's not of Elizabeth, but it's of
the Warhol.
The Warhol
The
and
Warhol.
her 2 Oscars.
That's not the real one, is it?
Well, I think if it's in Elizabeth's house, it has a very good chance to be.
Oh my goodness.
And there's that musical I was telling you about. So apparently I'm acting as if where is it? There.
Oh my gosh.
I'm
Do you
acting
know
as
what,
if
Guy?
What?
Oh, look what Maria's got on her wall. Oh, on her fridge.
Oh, there you go. Look,
I can confirm that mine is not the real one.
Oh, you've got the real. I can tell you, it's the weirdest thing when you walk around in the world, and then I can't get that right. That's Elizabeth's trophy cabinet.
Oh wow.
Couple
Oh,
of
Guy, right? I think literally at Wiltons, we're gonna like accost you for like to see all these photos.
Oh, I can bring these in, but no, it's the weirdest thing to be part of that family and to be in the business, because you know, you're asking for trouble, really, on the one hand. But as I say to my cousin Kate, who's the only other person, well, she's not the only other person in the family doing it, but Kate Burton was Richard's daughter, and she's been nominated for 4 Tonys. She's a brilliant actress. She's been in all kinds of series. You'd know her face. When I became an actor, I called her first, not for permission, but just to say, warn you, I'm going to do it. And she said, you know it's hard, don't you? And I said, I know it's hard, but I'm gonna try. Anyway, she's always been a great supporter of mine. She was going to be doing a Broadway show this year in August, and she called me to say, just read the news about the shark. That's great news. I'm doing a show on Broadway too. Isn't that going to be a wonderful thing? And unfortunately, her show has run out of money and been pulled, so it's not happening at the moment. But it does
Sell
feel
the Warhol. Sell the Warhol.
So it does feel like something of coming a full circle with my father and Richard and all of that kind of thing, and Broadway and yeah. Anyway, the celebration is happening, I think, next week with Under Milkwood. And,
yes.
You know, that to me is me saying thank you to Uncle Richard and to Mr. Dylan Thomas.
Who is your favourite variety performer?
Well, seeing as you mentioned Eric, I would say Eric in hindsight, but my current favorite is Mel Madden Gray, who is Melissa Madden Gray, who's Meow Meow. Meow Meow is a genius, and she's so different to the person behind the character. And yeah, I've seen her so often, and we've become friends. And yeah, she did a lot of work with Barry Humphries. And I was due to see her last week. I directed a musical in Australia called The Marvelous Elephant Man, and she was due to come, but it was the day that Barry died, so she was mourning. But yeah, she's my favorite, and she's extraordinary. She's so courageous, and she's not just burlesque at all. She's a super bright burlesque, everything variety performer.
Of all the theatres you've ever performed in, Guy, of all the theatres you've ever been associated with, which one holds a really special place in your heart?
Oh, God. That is so difficult. I've got a top 5. Oh, my God, that's so difficult.
You can list your top 5.
Well, there's the Madge Theatre in Perth, where we did 12 Angry Men. There's the Royal Opera House in Wellington, where I did 12 Angry Men. There is the Blackpool Grand, where I performed Animal Farm back in 1997, the biggest payday of my theatrical life. Did 2 shows there, both sold out. And I looked at the paycheck and went, really? Someone and then the Lensic Theatre in Santa Fe, which is just stunning. And I think actually, and I have to say the Traverse Theatre, because that's really the place which, and it's not because of its beauty or anything like that. It just holds a very special place in my heart. But I've played so many. Crikey, I've played probably about 1,000 different theatres around the world.
Just doing Under Milkwood.
Yeah. Under Milkwood and Animal Farm and Oleanna and the various, and Christmas Carol, which is my current big thing that I do. Bath Theatre Royal, another one. You know,
gorgeous.
But it's lovely, isn't it, that there are so many special. Each theatre has something special to be discovered about it.
Yes, I love Matcham theatres. Love them.
Yes.
You know, there's Harrogate is fantastic. Blackpool Grand, of course. Buxton Opera House, which I've played several times.
Buxton, it's because they feel intimate, even though they're so huge and grand. But there's no bad seat.
That's right. And you can hear a pin drop in the gods.
Yeah.
And that is extraordinary for a Victorian theatre.
We are performing at the Blackpool Grand at the end of this month in the studio. Our show that we wrote is in the studio at the Blackpool Grand. So we will send you a lovely photo from there and think of you.
When are you doing that?
The 27th of May.
27th of May.
27th of May, we're at the Blackpool Grand.
I'm performing, darling, in Kelso.
Oh, well, we'll let you off. We'll let you off. So we always ask our guests as well, if you could wake up tomorrow and have any God-given talent,
Yeah.
what style of variety performer would you be?
But you just qualified God-given talent. I was going to say to be a screenwriter. I have written a screenplay about the Uncle Richard, by the way. As a variety performer, Cirque du Soleil blow my mind all the time. And when you see those acrobats and those jugglers, and you realize the skill level that it takes to get to that point, to the point where it looks, instead of the machination of juggling, it looks like it's just happening. I find that incredible.
They're not doing neck up acting, are they? They're not doing the neck up acting at Cirque du
No,
Soleil.
not at all. Especially the toe juggler.
Yes.
What juggler? I mean, how she keeps up 5 balls in the air with her feet. Come on. I mean, when she was born, she was 6 years old, she uttered, "What are you going to be when you grow up, Tony?" "I'm going to be a toe juggler." Yes, darling. Yes, have some pizza.
We always end with a quick fire round of this or that, guys. So it's just an instinctive answer, whatever comes to your mind. We're going to give you 2 options and you just pick whichever one you think resonates the most with you. Okay. Are you ready? Okay, I'll kick us off with, who was the better Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor or Amanda Barry?
Elizabeth Taylor.
Correct.
Would you rather have Pimm's on the lawn or mulled wine by the fire?
Pimm's on the lawn.
Are you a press night partier or do you prefer a stage door sneak out?
I'm a press night partier.
Would you rather be sat in the audience or waiting in the wings?
Well, that's a very tough one. That's a very tough one. I'd probably still say waiting in the wings. I'm surprised at myself, to be honest.
Would you rather spend the weekend in Morecambe or on the Orca?
No, on my Orca, that's for sure. Morecambe.
I would love to know, quick fire, who is your favourite character to play in Under Milkwood?
Polly Garson.
You heard it here first. Well, we can't wait to see you play Polly Garter and all of these fabulous characters next week at Wiltons Music Hall. And just talking to you, I just think everyone hopefully will flood out and watch, because you obviously have so much skill of your own. You were talking about the toe juggler, but to do what you do in this show, Absolutely. You must have such a high level of skill as well. And
you are basically toe juggling.
And we can't wait to see you there, and it's just going to be fabulous. And if you bring those pictures as well, you might not want to, because then we're definitely not going to leave you alone.
It's been a real privilege to speak to you. We've just loved it. So thank you very much for giving us your time today.
Told you I rambled, right?
Well, what an interview. I could not cope with those photos, and I could not cope with seeing the Warhol.
I know.
Imagine
and there's you with a little fridge magnet.
Imagine not only owning a Warhol, but owning a Warhol of yourself.
Like craziness. It's a different world, isn't it?
If you could be painted by any artist, who would it be?
Oh, regardless of whether they're alive or dead.
Yeah.
Oh, it'd have to be Picasso. I'd love a Picasso of myself.
Oh, a nice Michael Alan-Bailey Picasso. I can see it.
Yeah.
with a wonky nose, like half off to the side.
My glasses on the side of my head and everything.
See, I always see myself as like I'd love to be like a Pre-Raphaelite, like a Rossetti, like one of these I don't know, they're not, are they? They're Victorian, but they're almost like these medieval, like paintings, Lady of Shalott, that style. I would love that, but I don't think that is actually my personality at all. I think that's how I would like myself to be remembered throughout time.
Well, probably the same actually with the Picasso. I think that I'm this complicated, kind of broken, fragmented soul, whereas really I think we're probably just a couple of Liechtensteins, aren't we?
Yeah, we are full of spots. full of spots and dots. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. It was so lovely to share our time with Guy and just cover so much. He's someone that's just really got so many different experiences under his belt, and we're so privileged that he got to spend time with us. And we will let you know how the show was when we go and see it on Tuesday. All that's left for us to say is,
see you next week.
And I should warn you that I'm currently on an entertainment podcast right now, so you're being recorded.